Don't let anybody make you think that God chose America as his divine messianic force to be a sort of policeman of the whole world. God has a way of standing before the nations with judgment, and it seems that I can hear God saying to America, you are too arrogant. And if you don't change your ways, I will rise up and break the backbone of your power.
Hotep, which in the language of ancient Egypt means we come with justice in peace. Welcome to Freedom Now, a Saturday Pan-Africanist and Internationalist World Affairs program. Freedom Now is committed to the principle of the rights of all peoples and nations to self-determination. We thank you deeply for your contribution to KPFK, which permits programs like Freedom Now to stay on the air. In this era of corporate acquisition and co-optation of all dissident media, we provide the microphone, challenging their corporate and racist point of view. So stay tuned for Agenda here at Freedom Now.
Fellas, I'm ready to get up and do my thing. I want to get into it, man, you know.
Peace, hoteps, and wisdom to all of our faithful and devoted listeners out there in the radio verse. This is Brother Brandon Sankara, and I want to start things off with a thank you to all of you listeners out there who continue to support us here at Freedom Now through this latest season of Fund Drive. You keep us on our mission and allow us to bring you our agenda for today, Saturday, April 13th, 2024. We begin with the one, the only, our dear Freedom Now founder, Babadidan Kamati, bringing us the African drumbeat historical calendar for the week, reminding us that every day is a day in African history. After that, author, historian, and professor of African American Studies at the University of Houston and Freedom Now co-producer Dr. Gerald Horne will be joined on the line by reparations activists Colette Pean and Roger Wareham of the December 12th movement in New York City. Then, in the second half of our program, we'll be hearing from John Bardes, assistant professor of history at Louisiana State University in Baton Rouge. And for our purposes today, he's author of the book The Carceral City, Slavery and the Making of Mass Incarceration in New Orleans, 1803 to 1930. It'll be yet another informative and enlightening morning for you listeners, right here on KPFK. Now, while we are in Fund Drive and still able to bring you this much quality content, we want to remind you to please support our efforts here at KPFK. Let's hear from the Sultan of Study himself, Dr. Gerald Horne, with a message for those who can't get enough of Freedom Now.
For KPFK Pacifica Radio, this is Gerald Horne for Freedom Now, urging you to go to our secure website at kpfk.org and make a secure pledge to make sure that the valuable information that you receive on a weekly basis on Freedom Now continues. Where else but Freedom Now can you receive detailed information on the struggle for reparations of descendants of enslaved Africans, or the prison industrial complex, or the continuing current legacy of enslavement, or the glories of victories over white supremacy and colonialism and imperialism? Where else but Freedom Now do you get such information, along with the hippest music mix in North America, including the work of John Coltrane, Alice Coltrane, Pharoah Sanders, McCoy Tyner, Regina Carter, and Esperanza Spalding, amongst others? At Freedom Now, we take special pride in our programming concerning Black women's struggles in particular, making us unique on the airwaves. So pick up the phone and dial
818-985-KPFK. That's 818-985-5735. Make your pledge and support our efforts here at Freedom Now. Now, of course, I'm going to be on the ones and twos as we pour this knowledge, making sure your mental cup runneth over with revolutionary wisdom right here to quench your mental thirst on Freedom Now. KPFK 90.7 FM in Los Angeles and kpfk.org on the web. To make sure that we stay on a smooth ride with that cultural vibe you know and love, we'll be enjoying a musical bottom featuring Talib Kweli, Ahmad Jamal, Christian Sands, Addison Evans, Robert Glasper, Pharaoh Sanders, and Herbie Hancock. Now people get ready for this train to come and taking you one step closer to mental liberation, and stay tuned for that beat of the historical drum, followed by a conversation with Dr. Gerald Horne, Colette Pean, and Roger Wareham.
Alafia, this is Brother Didon with the African Drumbeat Historical Calendar for the week of April 13th, here at KPFK's Freedom Now, where we are the only radio station to pay tribute to those sheroes and heroes whose struggles have advanced the forward revolution of society, from smaller social units of inequality to larger social units of equality, as well as acknowledging atrocities that European capitalists have continued to plague upon humanity. April 13th, 1919. British colonial troops murdered hundreds and wounded thousands at a peaceful rally in India, sparking the rise of militant anti-British movements, culminating in the independence of India. April 14th, 1928, Dr. Robert Mugabe, the Prime Minister of Zimbabwe, was born. President Mugabe led the Zimbabwe African National Union in the guerrilla war against European settler colonialism in Rhodesia. Through the forging of a patriotic united front with Joshua Nkomo ZAPU, Africans gained independence. The peace agreement called the Lancaster Accord was an agreement in which England and the United States made a contract for the financing of the return of stolen lands to the peasants and workers of Zimbabwe. After 30 years of stalling, the former guerrillas seized the large agricultural tracts of the European settlers, thereby invoking the anger of the Western world. The United States and England are presently orchestrating a campaign of regime change against Mugabe's government to guarantee the Europeans keep control of the majority of Africans' lands. April 14th, 1970. Two African students at Jackson State University, James Earl Green, a high school student, and Philip Lafayette Gibbs in Mississippi, were assassinated by the Mississippi police while protesting the war in Vietnam, racism, and the killing of white students at Kent State by the National Guard of Ohio. April 15, 1958, African Freedom Day is declared at the All-African People's Conference in Ghana. This is the gathering of guerrillas and liberation movements from Africa and diaspora to coordinate political aggression against the European capitalist colonial rule. April 15, 1917, Carmen Martinez Bonilla was born. She was a Dominican Republic author, playwright, and poet who was exiled for being an outspoken critic of U.S.-backed dictator Trujillo. She traveled the world promoting women's rights as a central aspect of anti-imperialism and the Dominican Republic's fight against neocolonialism. April 15, 1986, 66 U.S. jets bombed Libya, hitting Ben Ashir, a densely populated suburb of the capital city of Tripoli, and Colonel Muammar Gaddafi's residential compound, which took a direct hit that killed his daughter, Hana Gaddafi. Libya was alleged to have been involved in the bombing of the Libello Disco in West Berlin, Germany, a popular U.S. soldier club in which 3 people were killed. German state-run television, ZDF, recently published a documentary that the main perpetrators of the bombing at the West Disco worked for American and Israeli intelligence. Libya has been a base for freedom fighters worldwide and has used its massive oil wealth for the benefits of the masses of Libyans and all the oppressed peoples. April 16, 1960, SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, was formed to coordinate student movements throughout the United States as a direct fighting force against segregation and racist terrorism. SNCC's field organized projects where students would live with African sharecroppers. These student activists would conduct political education classes to empower the dispossessed peasants to challenge the racist apartheid Jim Crow's laws. This grassroots organized movement set the framework for the mobilization efforts of the civil rights movement of Dr. Martin Luther King and SCLC. April 16, 1886, Nabawiya Musa was born, a militant Egyptian nationalist woman leader who fought for Egyptians' independence from Britain in 1922. She advocated for girls' education, and she led the campaign against state-licensed prostitution and spoke out against the violations of the national rights of the Palestinians. April 16, 1971, U.S.-Vietnam vets against the war staged a mass demonstration of over 20,000 where they threw their canes and medals at the U.S. Congress in defiant protest against the capitalist wars. April 17, 1961, the Cuban masses crushed the CIA-backed invasion of the Bay of Pigs, thereby verifying for the world the popular support of the masses for Fidel Castro and the Cuban Communist Party. Subsequently, over 1,000 covert CIA efforts by the United States to overthrow the popular socialist regime of Fidel Castro has failed. April 18, 1955, the first conference of Asian and African countries occurred in Bandung. This conference, which Malcolm X makes reference to, was a gathering of liberation movements of people of colors addressing the question of European colonialism. This has been the African Drumbeat Historical Calendar here at Freedom Now. Tonight's program can be reheard for the next 90 days at kpfk.org, audio archives, scroll to Freedom Now. Please join us in a unity chant of Amanda Lowetu, which means the power belongs to the people. We the people. Amanda Lowetu 3 times.
For Pacifica Radio, KPFK Los Angeles, this is Gerald Horne, and with me on the line are Colette Pean and Roger Wareham of the December 12th Movement of New York City and reparations activists. Thank you for joining us on Freedom Now, Los Angeles, Colette Pean and Roger Wareham.
Thank you for having us on, and thank you for your everlasting work on this issue and so many others. So thank you, Dr. Horne.
Well, okay.
Yes, I second that. Mm-hmm.
Right on. So, Colette, what is the December 12th movement? When did it start? What does it do?
December 12th movement as an organization started in December 12th, 1987, when we organized a demonstration in Newburgh, New York, to protest a series of racial attacks that had happened. Newburgh is upstate of New York City, and the demonstration of over 1,500 people in the streets of Newburgh was one of the largest that had occurred in a while, because there had been a little quiet period in our movement, a little change in our movement. Founding the December 12th movement, Coltrane Chimaranga and Viola Plummer of the Black Men's Movement and the Harriet Tubman Fannie Lou Hamer Collective, Ilumbe Brath of the Patrice Lumumba Coalition, Sonny Carson from the Committee to Honor Black Heroes, and Reverend Father Lawrence Lucas came together and stayed together to create a Black human rights organization fighting racism, fighting for self-determination, and with the real focus to bring our issues in the international arena as well, community-based, and also following Malcolm's dictates that it is an international issue. Mm-hmm. And so we continue this.
Now, Roger Wareham, I read in the New York Amsterdam News that your comrade, who Colette has just mentioned, speaking of Viola Plummer, has joined the Ancestors, and there was quite a bit of coverage about her passing. Talk to us about who was Viola Plummer.
Viola Plummer was a force, as you well know, Gerald. She grew up in the movement. She participated in every aspect of the movement, from voter registration to civil rights to Black power to Black liberation. She, as Colette laid out, she was the founder of the December 12th movement. She was one of the lead people in what this case that became known as the New York Aid Against Fascist Terrorism, which was a group of 8 of us who were political activists and revolutionaries who were arrested under the auspices of then U.S. Attorney General Rudy Giuliani back in 1984, and we were charged with RICO conspiracy and all sorts of plans to break political prisoners out of jail, to rob armored cars to finance that, none of which ever happened, none of which was ever true, but it was really an attack on the movement, on people who had taken a position that Black people have a right to armed self-defense, that Black people have a right to free their political prisoners. And it was the criminal case was the front by which they really wanted to derail that type of motion. So she was the leadership in that, and she was a visionary. A lot of people, when they talk about Viola, calls her like the Harriet Tubman of the, cross 20th, 21st century. She led by example. She never asked anybody to do anything that she wasn't prepared to do, and she was a Marxist, and she was a visionary, and she was at the same time an activist.
Mm-hmm. So, Colette Pean, talk to us about recent trends in New York State on reparations. For example, I understand that a reparations commission is now in motion. Is that accurate?
Yes, indeed. That is accurate. And we have to trace back the fight for this particular bill, which is now passed and signed by Governor Hochul in December, to Viola working with Charles Barron in his assembly office. And for 3 to 4 years, they struggled to put together a reparations bill, different than some of the other bills. This one does not call to study. It is a call for remedies. They struggled together to get it passed. Charles got it passed in the Assembly twice. It finally was brought to the Senate as well. And after much internal disruption by the usual forces of disruption, Gerald, in New York, under community pressure, it was passed by both houses, sat on Hochul's desk from June through December. There were numerous rallies, organized meetings, write-ins, phone calls to pressure Hochul to sign the bill, which has now created the New York State Reparations Commission. In that process, the push that Charles and Viola had made for this commission to be based in the grassroots was taken out. It was scheduled to be that 3 grassroots groups would nominate who would be on the commission, and COBRA, Ron Daniels Institute for the Black World, in December 12th. Instead, who named the commission was Governor Hochul, the head of the New York State Assembly and the head of the New York Senate. We, in December 12th, nonetheless think that it is very much the grassroots which will and must push and lead this issue, as everything in our movement. So working in conjunction with some of the legislators, and much more so with many of our community members, we intend to expand the fight for reparations through this using the law, using the quote call for remedies as a motion to popularize, to agitate, to organize the issue of reparations. And so we have had a very successful meeting 2 weeks ago, people taking up the issues and examining how we're going to set up. One brother raised the issue of setting up institutions to look at different models as we look at the collective response, the collective need for reparations. Another one said that the other people said that it was important to reach out nationally to other reparations like motions. So we keep saying that the solution must indeed be federal. From that same meeting, people volunteered to work on outreach to the unions, to the churches, to the schools. So what is happening in New York, and there are other groups also in motion around this, I think the call for it must be at the grassroots level has resonated. This brother, Ross Jomo from Buffalo, was on the call. He's organizing. He's part of our whole Millions for Reparations, we're calling it, organizing in Buffalo. And so there's an excitement and a fervor that we would want to keep expanding on. That's what's happening in New York.
So, Roger Wareham, talk to us about the pressure that was placed on the governor to move this bill off her desk, and also elaborate on what Colette said about what's happening at this very moment with regard to pressure.
Sure. The pressure that was put on the governor was a real textbook example of how it is that when masses of people are mobilized, you can affect change. The first part of it was getting the bill passed, and it was passed by both houses of the legislature. As Colette said, it was in June. So from June to December, she didn't do anything with the bill. And what could have happened is, if she had not signed it by the end of December, the bill would have died it would have died, and then it would have to have been reintroduced the following year. So there was a motion of people that we had been in contact with all across the spectrum of people who were interested in reparations to call her, to email her, to text her, to fax her, and when they saw her in the street, to talk to her about that. And that's what happened. There were even people who were abroad, a group called Democrats Abroad for Reparations, that were contacting her from around the world. So it was really that collective pressure, along with her understanding that if she failed to sign the bill, this was going to have very bad repercussions for her in the Black community when she came up for re-election. So it was a combination of those things. So that was one thing. So the bill was signed. Now the question became, because the bill there was no provision for a budget. So the commission is supposed to meet, and within a year of its meetings, it's supposed to have a report on its remedies. And so that's one of the things that is going on. So we're continuing that type of pressure. But I think the point Colette made and our perspective on it is that regardless to what the commission does, we're going to continue the work we've done over the last 30 years around educating our community around reparations and the importance of it and the necessity of it in terms of them understanding how it will affect their lives, in their daily lives, which our position is that Black people are the victim of a collective crime against humanity, the transatlantic slave trade and slavery, that the repair has to be collective, and that although we support all these different movements that are going on around the country, it's really going to require the federal government in the final analysis for there to be a real resolution to the reparations situation. When President Biden was elected when President Biden was elected in 2020, we launched a campaign for Biden to sign an executive order for a $50 billion down payment on reparations, with the view that this did not require any congressional intervention, any of the politics that have attended the prior legislation, but that he, as the president, could issue an executive order, $50 billion. Our position was it should go towards provision of state-of-the-art health care in our communities, and it would break the ice in terms of the federal government actually doing something around reparations. And we're continuing that to today, because, as we said in the final analysis, it was the federal government, as you've documented in your many books, including the Counter-Revolution of 1776, that was about slavery, and it was the federal government that was behind that, and that has to be, in the end, the final resolution. We're reaching out to other groups around the country, in terms of what they're doing. We really want to, pull people together, and not have us all, in these separate channels, thinking that those separate channels are really going to resolve the question of reparations, because the system will say, well, look, they got it in North Carolina, they got it in Chicago, they got it in Milwaukee. But no, that's not the answer. We really have to work together and to continue to push the perspective that it is a collective repair, that it's going to be a collective repair, more so than people getting checks in their mailbox individually.
One more point, Roger. You talked about reaching out across the country. I'm sure you know that in the state of California, there have been similar steps with regard to reparations. A commission was established. They made a report. Have the December 12th movement or reparations activists generally had any contact with your peers and comrades in the Golden State?
We have not. I mean, when the California piece was first happening, and they had people calling in to voice their opinions on that, We did that. We have not been in contact with them, but we will be. That's part of the outreach that we're doing at this point in terms of looking at what's going on around the country and how it is we can join our resources in doing that.
Colette Pean, I think it was you who mentioned that the original proposal was to have representatives from the December 12th movement on the Reparations Commission. Apparently, that is not the case, but on that commission are Derek Hamilton of the New School, an economist, and Professor Ron Daniels, who of course is part of Institute of the Black World, 21st Century, and Pacific Radio as well, WBAI FM in New York City. Talk to us about why December 12th was not included, and also how do you assess the current membership of the Reparations Commission?
Part of the bickering, to put it very nicely, that occurred was people who were opposed to the grassroots approach that December 12th has, opposed to our politics of non-compromise in a sense, argued very forcefully that they did not want us on the bill. In the spirit of it was more important to have a reparations bill than to be a named member. We pushed for the reparations bill after our name was to be organized, to be passed, to be signed, because we think it's important for our people that this be on the topic and it is a vehicle. The taking out the community participation comes from, we're going to have the because some people unlike Ron, some of the people who have been named to the commission, we have never been familiar with them having any work or influence in the reparations movement whatsoever, because they took Cobra out as well. Let us be very clear. And while Ron was named as a commission member, he was not able to, as an entity, name people to the commission. What was the designation was that we would be naming people to the commission. So, for example, Dr. Ray Woodenbush was one of the people who we thought should be on the commission as an expert. Having said that, we are not daunted. We are as committed as ever to stirring and organizing and agitating. Of the people on the commission, several of them are known to us. Some of them are also known to Brother Ross Jomo out of Buffalo. We are planning to organize a meeting in Brooklyn, most likely, to bring the commissioners to the community. Because one of the things that happens with these commissions in New York, as you're familiar, they won't get any money, they won't have any time, they won't have any resources, and their work will be done and be quiet and not have the impact it could have had. So we see that bringing the people into the discourse is crucial. We are going to link, as Millions for Reparations, these commissioners to the people. Attorney Lori Daniels from the Center for Law and Social Justice is a Brooklyn-based organization, has done tremendous amount of work in our community, and has several of the other people. I just know Lori better. So our view of the people of the commission is those who have not previously been engaged need to be educated by the community, by experts such as yourself, such as Deidre Hellman Farmer, who did the groundwork legislation that led to the lawsuits against companies. That these, for our people, the linkage of the work done on reparations by all the people I mentioned, the educating of our community to be ever more involved, not just educated about, but involved in pushing for reparations. That is our task, and it is our task to engage the commission in this and to push for the real remedies to come out of this bill, because this is about remedies in our view, to push for meaningful remedies, to push for an understanding that indeed it is a federal government responsibility to pay reparations, that the roots of the transatlantic slave trade as a crime against humanity was economic, and it was a crime against humanity, always should have been so, rooted in economics, and the reparations are due. So that is the context in which we see the commission.
Finally, Roger Wareham of the December 12th movement in New York City, could you direct our audience to any websites that might be useful in this process? And secondly, is there any perspective or timetable as to what and when the commission will will do.
Right. To answer your second question, the commission is, according to the legislation, is supposed to provide its report on remedies within 1 year after their first meeting. We have no word yet when their first meeting is scheduled. The commission members were really just settled, I think, the end of February. So we don't know, but it's supposed to be within 1 year. Don't know what budget limitations will mean to that. In terms of a website, we have a website, www.d12m.com. That's D, the numbers 12m.com. You can also go to Facebook December 12th Movement, where you'll find information around what we've been doing around reparations, and also in terms of just some of the background of the December 12th Movement, and some more background around our chairperson who just passed, Viola Plummer.
Well, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. Colette Pean and Roger Wareham of the December 12th Movement in New York City and reparations activists, thank you for joining us on Freedom Now, KPFK, Los Angeles.
Thank you for the...
Special thanks to Colette Pean and Roger Wareham for sharing their work with us. Where else can you get such quality content, context, and historical perspective other than Freedom Now? Dr. Horne, talk to the people a bit about the importance of supporting the show and the station.
For KPFK Pacifica Radio, this is Gerald Horne for Freedom Now, urging you to go to our secure website at kpfk.org and make a secure pledge to make sure that the valuable information that you receive on a weekly basis on Freedom Now continues. Where else but Freedom Now can you receive detailed information on the struggle for reparations of descendants of enslaved Africans, or the prison industrial complex, or the continuing horrid legacy of enslavement, or the glories of victories over white supremacy and colonialism and imperialism? Where else but Freedom Now do you get such information, along with the hippest music mix in North America, including the work of John Coltrane, Alice Coltrane, Pharoah Sanders, McCoy Tyner, Regina Carter, and Esperanza Spalding, amongst others? At Freedom Now, we take special pride in our programming concerning Black women's struggles in particular, making us unique on the airwaves. So pick up the phone and dial
818-985-KPFK. That's 818-985-5735. Or go online to kpfk.org to donate right now and make your support for the show and the station felt. Now we're going to keep this train a-moving and send you back off to Dr. Horne, who's being joined on the line by author and Professor John Bardes, right here on Freedom Now.
For Pacifica Radio, KPFK Los Angeles, this is Gerald Horne, and with me on the line is John Bardes, Assistant Professor of History at Louisiana State University in Baton Rouge, and author of the book, The Carceral City, Slavery and the Making of Mass Incarceration in New Orleans, 1803 to 1930. Thank you for joining us on Freedom Now, KPFK Los Angeles, Professor Bardes.
Yeah. Hello, thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. So why did you write this book, The Carceral City?
Yeah, so I wanted to study how policing and prison systems changed in response to emancipation and the Civil War. And what I expected to find was that enslaved people weren't really incarcerated before the Civil War, but that after emancipation, all these new prison systems and police departments developed to target Black Americans. And I found, to my real shock, that story was wrong, that I wanted to tell. Not because freed people were not being incarcerated in high rates after emancipation, but because incarceration rates of enslaved people before emancipation were actually astronomical, much, much higher than what I expected. That in fact, in parts of the South, particularly in cities, police departments were arresting enslaved people at astronomical rates long before the Civil War. Incarceration rates were not so high that they were in fact higher than incarceration rates that Black Americans face in the 21st century, and that much of the South's carceral infrastructure that would define the Jim Crow era, that already existed before emancipation and was being used to target enslaved people. That this story that that I think many different scholars are exploring today of how the roots of mass incarceration trace to the post-emancipation moment. That I argue that the roots of mass incarceration in this country are much, much earlier, are much, much older, and date to these early antebellum efforts developed in cities like New Orleans to develop police and prison systems aimed at enslaved people.
Now, pre-U.S. Civil War, is it fair to assume that there were many Black people being incarcerated for arson and poisoning? And also, what other kinds of offenses were leading to incarceration?
Yeah, this is a wonderful question. So the sources that I used to tell this story and to find the arrest rates that you're describing, the prison books and the arrest ledgers from New Orleans' prison system and police department, they survive and they record the reasons for incarceration. And they document somewhere in the ballpark of 400,000 arrests prior to the Civil War, a shocking number. The incarceration for poison and arson and other violent acts of insurrection, that was actually shockingly rare. Violent crimes accounted for somewhere in the neighborhood of about 4% of all prison admittances of enslaved individuals. The vast majority of people, upwards of 70 to 80%, were incarcerated for acts of illicit mobility. Traveling without a pass, violating the city's slave curfew, trying to escape slavery entirely by fleeing to the north or fleeing to a country where slavery was outlawed. That was the vast majority of admittances in New Orleans and other southern cities.
Mm-hmm. What about the role of gender? I assume that at least pre-Civil War, perhaps even post-Civil War, disproportionately there were Black men who were being arrested. Is that a fair assumption? And how would you speak about Black women being arrested both pre and post-Civil War?
So then and now, men made up the vast majority of prison admittances, but the incarceration rate among Black women was actually shockingly high by historic standards. So about a third of all people admitted to New Orleans' slave prison system were Black women. Again, not the majority, but much, much higher than than female incarceration rates in a historic context. And women were admitted to slave prisons for a variety of reasons, in many cases similar to men. So about half of all people who were admitted, men or women, were admitted by New Orleans' police department, arrested while moving around the city without the permission of their enslaver. But women were also incarcerated by their enslavers at shockingly high rates. It was surprisingly common for enslavers to commit women to the slave prison system for months or even years, and in some cases on the condition that they be incarcerated for the remainder of their lives. And I think this systematic incarceration of women by their enslavers is really telling. I mean, obviously the enslaver is not making a rational economic choice by doing that, right? Like they are losing money by having an enslaved person incarcerated for months, years, or for life. And it speaks to, I think, a brutal sadism that and a thirst for violence that really transcends purely financial motivations.
No, I think I heard you say that pre-U.S. Civil War, pre-1861, about 1/3 of those incarcerated were women. What about post-1865? Does the number go up or down?
It fluctuates over time. It stays. It generally decreases. You know, I believe at Louisiana State Penitentiary during the Jim Crow era, it's closer to around 10% of all inmates are women. So it generally goes, the gender ratio generally goes down, which is more common for what we see historically in male-female gender ratios in prisons.
Mm-hmm. Now, what about the notorious Angola prison in Louisiana, which is in the headlines even as we speak? Is it coincidental that it carries the name of the nation in Southwest Africa, Angola? Or is that not coincidental?
So Angola State Penitentiary, as you said, one of the most violent and notorious penitentiaries in the country. It derives from a slave plantation that was founded on that site in the 1830s, and that was named Angola. That plantation was named Angola purely because the original owner, I mean, he owned several plantations, and he assigned several of those plantations names that he associated with different geographic regions. There is a myth out there in people who study Angola that the name comes from the birthplaces of the original enslaved inhabitants of that plantation. That is not the case. It seems like the original planter in the 1830s simply assigned some of the names of his plantations names of locations in Africa as a, for whatever his, I can only hypothesize as to what his odd motivations in that might have been.
Mm-hmm. Now, you've alluded already to how things changed post-1865 with regard to incarceration rates. Could you elaborate upon that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I was most shocked by in my research was how little changed in New Orleans and other southern cities that had really elaborate carceral infrastructure before the Civil War. New Orleans, with the abolition of slavery, officials in New Orleans decided that a prison system that had previously been used to coerce resistant and rebellious enslaved people, that could now be reworked into a new prison system to coerce freed people. So New Orleans' slave prison system was simply renamed and reopened. Many of the torture systems and penal labor routines that the slave prison system had deployed, this new prison system just continued deploying them. And so a prisoner, a formerly enslaved prisoner in, let's say, 1880, would be performing penal labor very similar to the penal labor that their enslaved parent, if incarcerated, would have worked in that same prison, only 20, 30 years earlier. That in essence, the prison system of New Orleans that would define the Jim Crow era, in many ways, that was a continuation of slave penal labor systems that had been in deployment in Louisiana since the early 1800s.
Mm-hmm. And what about the role of profit, both before the U.S. Civil War, before 1861 and after 1865?
Yes. There is not a street, pipe, sidewalk, sewage line, or gutter in 19th century New Orleans that was not built, cleaned, repaired by slave penal labor. That antebellum New Orleans was deeply economically reliant on the use of enslaved penal laborers to clean the city, to build public infrastructure, to build the levees and wharfs and canals that made economic development possible. that the city could not have grown, could not have been one of the most important ports in the world without the use of hundreds of enslaved penal laborers each day. Now, shockingly, or I think shockingly to many of us in the 21st century, slaveholders paid money to have enslaved people incarcerated. It actually to have an enslaved person incarcerated was actually quite expensive. A slaveholder had to pay a daily fee for this privilege. Slaveholders were willing to pay these fees and relied on slave prisons because they believed that this form of torture worked, that the jailers in slave prisons were experts in torturing resistant and rebellious enslaved people into submission, and that it was in a slaveholder's long-term benefit to outsource torture to the jailer, to the slave prison.
Now, what about post-1865? We know about the convict lease system, for example. Are there new forms of profit-making that are arriving post-1865?
Yes, I argue that the carceral systems that would define the Jim Crow era, so the widespread confinement of Black Americans through chain gangs, the use of Black prisoners all throughout the South to build public infrastructure, the convict lease system, the renting of prisoners to private contractors, all of that existed in southern cities well before emancipation. That what happened with emancipation was not the invention of entirely new convict labor systems, but rather the expansion into the countryside, into rural regions of chain gang systems and convict leasing systems that already existed in cities like New Orleans, Charleston, Savannah, Memphis, Nashville, Mobile, Alabama. It wasn't something new, but all of this existed well before emancipation.
And what role does Haiti play in your book?
Haiti, or rather the insurrection in Haiti in the 1790s and early 1800s, was the trigger that inspired the development of New Orleans' first police force and first slave prison. So the insurrection in Haiti, the first successful slave revolution in world history, was terrifying to Louisiana slaveholders. And they began perceiving, as refugees began fleeing from Haiti and fleeing in many cases into Louisiana, Louisiana slaveholders began perceiving that Black radicalism promulgated by Haiti was infecting the local enslaved population, that New Orleans might be on the verge of a slave revolution. And it was this fear that prompted the city to create one of the very first modern police departments in the United States, and simultaneously to create a slave prison system that promised to subdue resistant and rebellious enslaved people and transform them, at least in the eyes of city leaders, transform resistant enslaved people into submissive servants.
Mm-hmm. And what about the role of Cuba in your book?
So one of the things that really intrigued me about Cuba, but also about other communities in the Caribbean, is that the architects of slave prisons in the Caribbean swapped ideas continuously. So slave penal labor systems, slave torture devices that were practiced by slave prisons in Havana, by slave prisons in Jamaica, by slave prisons in Haiti, they would later show up in the slave prisons of Charleston, of Mobile, of New Orleans. That there was this exchange of penal technologies, that the American slaveholders drew inspiration from the slave prisons of Havana and of other Caribbean port cities. Constant back and forth of ideas.
Finally, Professor Bardes, author of the book, The Carceral City, Slavery and the Making of Mass Incarceration in New Orleans, 1803 to 1930. What's next on your agenda? And a compound question, would you recommend graduate students coming to LSU, Louisiana State University, to study?
Yes, thank you. So I'm working right now on my second book, which will explore an understudied slave insurrection panic that swept the Mississippi River Valley in 1841. And this slave insurrection panic was triggered by the realization that free Black steamboat workers working on steamships moving up and down the Mississippi River were spreading news and abolitionist politics to enslaved communities along the river. The insurrection panic was actually triggered by the realization that enslaved people in rural Louisiana had heard about the abolition of slavery in the British Empire. And they had learned of this through free Black steamboat hands. So while telling the story of this insurrection, I want to explore the ways that free Black workers transmitted radical news and information and helped sow or build an antebellum Black politics. So that's what I'm working on right now. In terms of why grad students should come to Louisiana or come to LSU in particular, LSU is a phenomenal place to study the antebellum South and the colonial South and slavery and these histories, not only because we have a tremendous faculty here, but because it's a tremendous benefit to young budding scholars to be really close to their archival records. You know, as a historian, I love the fact that I can roll out of bed and be in the archive in 10 minutes. And that is invaluable to a scholar who is studying topics related to the plantation South. So that's my LSU pitch.
Okay, just a footnote. I highly recommend the archives at Tulane in New Orleans, not to mention the Williams Historic New Orleans collection in the French Quarter. The latter is particularly tremendous on many different issues. I did a lot of my research on my jazz book, for example, at both Tulane and at the Williams Center. But I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there, Professor Bardes. Thank you for joining us on Freedom Now, KPFK, Los Angeles.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
For KPFK Pacifica Radio, this is Gerald Horne for Freedom Now, urging you to go to our secure website at kpfk.org and make a secure pledge to make sure that the valuable information that you receive on a weekly basis on Freedom Now continues. Where else but Freedom Now can you receive detailed information on the struggle for reparations of descendants of enslaved Africans, or the prison industrial complex, or the continuing horrid legacy of enslavement, or the glories of victories over white supremacy and colonialism and imperialism? Where else but Freedom Now do you get such information, along with the hippest music mix in North America, including the work of John Coltrane, Alice Coltrane, Pharoah Sanders, McCoy Tyner, Regina Carter, and Esperanza Spalding, amongst others. At Freedom Now, we take special pride in our programming concerning Black women's struggles in particular, making us unique on the airwaves. So pick up the phone and dial
818-985-5735. That's 818-985-KPFK.
I went to St. Louis, Missouri the other day, They had Black Panthers from all over the country. No one knew about it at all. They had machine guns, recoilless rifles, grease guns, Lugers, 25 of them, all armed. And the chief of police met me at the airport when I arrived, and they were there, right there at the steps. He said, "You were violating the law." "Yeah, we're violating the law." He said, "We're tired of our white and black leaders, Jackie and Martin and Bobby, being killed. We're going to protect this man while he's here." They didn't arrest one of them. Because they said if you arrest one, then someone's going to die, because we are ready to kill. Black power means black dignity. Just as surely as you're proud to be white, we're proud to be black. Black is beautiful, baby. It's pretty. I always say to my brothers, I say, "Baby, don't worry about the white chicks. We got everything from chalk to charcoal in our own race." You know, see? Black is beautiful. Black is beautiful. Black power means dignity. Means we're gonna walk side by side with you, or through you. We're gonna be with dignity and integrity. We don't want any more than you have, and we're not gonna accept any less than you have. That's black power.
In closing, we'd like to thank our guests, Colette Pean and Roger Wareham of New York City's December 12th movement, as well as Professor John Bardes from Louisiana State University for joining us on the show today. Find that Black-owned bookstore that you know and love and get Professor Bardes' book, The Carceral City. Shout out to Dr. Gerald Horne for doing what he does best and guiding this train of mental liberation towards Pan-African enlightenment for yet another Saturday. Hit up your favorite bookstore right now and find one of Dr. Horne's many informative texts to enrich your library and your mind. Word to producer Sister Tej. Much love to our spiritual backbone and Freedom Now founder Babadidan Kamathi on the historical calendar. Shout out to our marvelous engineer. And last but certainly not least, thanks to all of you loyal listeners and supporters out there. It takes a village to build a revolution, and Freedom Now is a village to be reckoned with. Please continue to support our programming. We are volunteer producers, and the station needs to help to pay the bills and keep the lights on in the building. So please dial 818-985-KPFK. That's 818-985-5735, or go online to kpfk.org to donate and support the show. This has been Brother Brandon Sankara, and you can join us on Facebook at Freedom Now, Gerald Horne. You can email the program at freedomnow@kpfk.org or go online to our audio archives at kpfk.org. Scroll down to Freedom Now and you'll be able to hear this program as well as 60 days worth of prior programming here at KPFK 90.7 FM. We now send you off to our sister Assumpta with Spotlight Africa coming up next, addressing issues facing Mama Africa. And until next Saturday, here at Freedom Now, we stand running our marathon, ready for revolution.